Meanwhile, folks who have joined, if you have any questions, do post them in the Q&A section, and we'll get to that throughout the session today. All right, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Sumo Logic webinar on Don't Let Legacy Splunk Derail Your Security and App Modernization. I'm Girish Bhatt. I'll be the host for today's session. One of the main reasons why we are putting together this webinar is that we are seeing many customers, hundreds and possibly thousands of customers. They're being impacted because they adopted legacy solutions such as Splunk, and they're unable to move past their legacy solutions to help realize their business goals that's needed to keep up with the rigors of today's business. So we'll get started soon on the specifics of how Sumo Logic can help you. In case you don't know about Sumo Logic, we are an 11-year-old company that offers a cloud-native solution for both observability and security. We have more than 2,300 customers across the world, representing enterprises, mid-markets, and startups across all verticals. So having said that, why don't we get to know my fellow presenters and colleagues better? So why don't we start with the introduction? Stefan, you want to go first, sir?
Sure. Stefan Zier, Chief Architect. Been fortunate to be with the company pretty much since the beginning and built a lot of the things that we're about to talk about.
Ash Karakia, I manage the professional services team for North America at Sumo Logic. Been with Sumo for about 3.5 years now.
Annie Lopez, Principal Manager for both products on the security and the observability side. Been with Sumo for almost 3 years as well.
I'm Girish, and I just realized that I have the shortest tenure among all the panelists and speakers here. Thank you, gentlemen. So what we have done today here, folks, is to give you a perspective on what are some of the modern enterprise challenges, and how does Sumo Logic help it? So that's why we have our chief architect, who was if not the first two among the first three co-founders, he was one of the initial employees in the companies who helped architect our entire Sumo Logic platform. And then we have Akash, who will give us some perspective on how he and his team are helping customers migrate from legacy solutions like Splunk to Sumo Logic. Manny will give real customer examples and walk you through a few of them. We have hundreds of these case studies on our website listed. Manny will walk you through a few examples of how customers have migrated to Sumo Logic. And towards the end, we'll leave ample time for Q&A. Meanwhile, as I said at the beginning, if you have any questions, do feel free to post them in the chat, in the Q&A section right now. Okay, why don't we get started? One of the founding tenets at Sumo Logic is that legacies are great for sports teams, but not for modern SaaS solutions. If you unpack this a little bit more, if you don't modernize your business stack, your tech stack, you are unable today to meet the goals of modern enterprises. And that's what was one of the founding tenets for Sumo Logic. And this is what we have been executing towards for the past 11 years. When we talk to customers, all of us on the panel and talk to hundreds and possibly thousands of customers in a given year, there are a few common themes that we hear. Innovation is a growth driver. There was a very famous quote from many years ago, either you innovate or you die, right? So I think it's very true in the modern world. If businesses who fail to innovate are the ones who you see are no longer in existence. Enterprises, whether you're a CIO, a CISO, board of director, or a CEO, enterprises are looking for efficiencies across their tech stack, but also the operational efficiency of how to do things faster. Perhaps tool consolidation is one of the efficiencies that the CIO is looking to achieve. How about reducing risk? We hear about risk. Risk has a significant pose a significant business risk to the entire organization if you're unable to handle the modern attacks and threats that enterprises experience. So what does this mean from a IT or security leader's perspective? We hear many of our observability customers are either already on the cloud or they're moving to a multi-cloud structure. For those who are not on the cloud migration journey is underway. And how do you migrate securely? You need to monitor, you need to have full visibility, and you need to secure your migration as well. Monolithic apps don't work anymore. While the app modernization initiatives are underway, you need to have a cohesive solution to do that the right way. And customer experience, we are all in the customer experience business, right? So whether you're an airline industry or a website or even our customer success teams, we all strive to achieve and deliver superior customer experience. This is not just the digital customer experience, it's rooted in that, but overall end-to-end customer experience. Does your IT or observability solution help you deliver that? Think about it. CIOs, CISOs talk about tool consolidation. I was looking at how many tools do we have. At Sumo, we have more than 200 plus IT and security tools. If I have to ask my CIO and CISO, they would say, yeah, Girish, we would like to reduce it by at least 75%, but it's not possible. However, for observability and security solutions, it is possible. There is no need today for you to have separate tools for an open source, something for one for logging, one for tracing, one for metrics. Solutions like Sumo, we do not only the observability all in one platform, but we also have security all under a single unified platform. Modernizing security has been, people have been talking about it for years now. I remember many years ago when we said, hey, we are going to replace ArcSight. That was a pretty cool thing, but it's no longer that. Do you have the agility within your security stack? Can you release content updates hourly, or do you have to wait for an annual turnaround cycle like many legacy solutions have? All along, you need to be compliant, whether it is internal compliance or external compliance. So these are some of the common challenges that we hear from our customers, both from practitioners and developers, as well as the business line of businesses and CIOs and CISOs as well. So at this point in time, what I'm going to do is to invite Stefan to walk us through some of the Sumo Logic differentiators. Stefan?
Thanks, Girish. I'll start by kind of describing the shortcomings of what we now talk about as, legacy on-prem software. I myself spent almost 10 years of my career building, supporting, maintaining such a product before the founding team and myself all wound up at Sumo Logic. We actually all came from the same company beforehand that built sort of very much that software. So we're intimately familiar with the shortcomings of that kind of an architecture. And what we're seeing Splunk and Elastic and other vendors do now is basically somehow take the software that was built for this on-prem style of deploying software and presenting it as a cloud offering, and it's ultimately a little more than a hosted offering, right? So it has, because of how it was deployed, it had a monolithic architecture that was, intended to, you buy a server, you rack the server, you install Splunk or Elastic or whatever, and that's where you run it, and that's what you got, right? And if you needed more capacity, you bought another server, you rack another server, you do the same thing. And in the modern world, sort of the cloud offerings, they do the racking and installing for you and sort of maintaining it for you, but that's about all, right? So behind the curtain, there's still explicit software upgrades happening. There's still versions you have to worry about, backwards compatibility. Am I on the latest version? There is, because of how these were built and because of the model they were built for, usually limited capabilities for the vendor to monitor your installation, especially if it's on-prem. They have no visibility into your network. So they don't know how it's performing They can't monitor it. They can't make adjustments to it. The release cycles, especially if you run it yourself, are by definition slow, because you're not gonna update your Splunk several times a day on-prem. It's just not a thing you do, right? And sort of from a vendor perspective, a lot of effort goes into just supporting back versions and a big matrix of platforms that the solution is deployed out into in the field, right? And their sort of hosted cloud adds another dimension to that matrix in a sense. So all in all, that creates a lot of overhead and a lot of inefficiencies on the vendor side to develop it, and it puts a lot of burden on customers, a lot of things they need to worry about in order to run the solution, right? Next slide, please, Girish. So when Sumo started back in 2010, it was literally founded because we recognized that there was a better way to deliver this kind of software. We actually tried for some period of time to do that within the confines of the old organization that we were all working on, but that organization had the problem of being too invested in that sort of traditional on-prem model, and there was no appetite for like a genuine sort of hit the reset button and start over. And so the only way we found to do this was, by starting a new company. And so Sumo was always been, or has always been, a SaaS only piece of software. Next slide. And so to tease it apart a little bit more, there's kind of three components that make our architecture different, right? One is that, the architecture was built to run in AWS always, because, definitely back in 2010, AWS was more or less the only public cloud in town that was reasonably serious. And I would argue even today, they're by and large the market leader from our perspective. And so we made a decision early on, instead of saying, hey, we'll buy our virtual machines from AWS and we'll leave it at that, we actually embraced the sort of higher level services. We're heavily dependent on S3, DynamoDB, lots of other AWS native services. And so we're able to stand on sort of the shoulders of a giant here and really be efficient and nimble as a development organization. Over the years, we've built a tight partnership with AWS. And they're literally half our AWS team is in our Slack instance supporting us all day, every day kind of a thing. And also on the go-to-market side, there's a pretty serious relationship at this point. And because we built it on the cloud, we recognized right from the start that we had an advantage in our ability to monitor what the system was doing and what customers were doing with the system in sort of an anonymized manner. So we could easily spot performance issues, make improvements without customers even knowing that they were, things were improving behind the scenes. Sort of another difference is that instead of building a monolith and having a team of several hundred developers all contribute to what amounts to one executable binary that needs to be upgraded in one lump, we have somewhere in the order of 60 plus individual microservices that all, perform a part of the application. There's one that just does the sort of field extraction stuff on ingest, and there's another that just, does the sort of term search portion of a query. There's another that does, and on and on and on, right? And that gives us the ability to align each of these services with a smaller team. And there's a thing called Conway's Law that says something like, if you take n teams, you will get a piece of software that, comprises of n parts, right? And so like the reverse Conway maneuver is to basically align the teams around your software architecture. But that means we have some services that, are moving very rapidly and where we're deploying multiple times a day in some instances. And then there's other services that are more mature that we maybe aren't actively developing, that, we only upgrade every 2 or 3 weeks, right? And it gives us that flexibility and the ability to deploy at different velocities. It also makes availability much easier because each team only needs to monitor their one service, and they're experts at that one service. They understand it in depth, and it has limited scope. So the complexity is just much smaller in this kind of approach, right? And sort of a fun side note, we constructed the software this way in 2010, but the term microservices only emerged in 2012, sorry. So the last piece is that, because of how these on-prem systems were built, you would sell it to one customer, and back when we started at the previous gig, you would literally show up with a CD-ROM and stick it into the server and install it, and then it was owned by that one customer, and the only customer ever touching it was that customer, right? At Sumo, we knew that there was a lot of power in co-hosting all our customers on a single system, right? And by system, I don't mean individual server, I mean clusters of servers, right? And doing resource allocation, we have an internal framework that's sort of sharding and resource allocation, and that readjusts on every cluster every 15 seconds, the resource allocation according to the load, right? And that gives us a lot of efficiencies, but also a lot of headroom, right? If you're on a cluster with several thousand other Sumo customers of varying sizes, there's always headroom if you're having a spike either in ingestion or in search, or anything that demands more resources temporarily. Our system can just adapt to on the fly, right? There's auto scaling sort of in the larger scheme of things, but auto scaling takes minutes. But these very short-term things we can adapt to very, very easily. Next slide, please. So here's one example where this microservice architecture is really beneficial to our customers. Unlike pretty much all of these, on-prem solutions that you can, load on a local server, we don't commingle ingestion and search onto the same resources, right? What that means is, if you're having some sort of an incident that means your ingestion is temporarily like 10 times of what it normally would be, in pretty much any of these monolithic applications, now your search performance completely falls apart because all your IOPS and all your CPU are taken up by the ingestion pipeline. In Sumo's case, first of all, we auto-scale on the ingestion pipeline and we simply allocate more resources, but search is completely unaffected because it's on a completely different set of machines that never do any of the ingestion work, right? And so next slide, please. So we kind of metaphorically equate the on-prem monolithic approach to sort of a one-man band where the guy sort of kicks the drum with his heel and he blows into the trumpet and he kind of plays a guitar, and if any of those things get out of rhythm, then the whole thing just kind of falls apart. And we sort of have a marching band with like drummers and trumpets and sort of all of the individual instruments being played not just by individuals. So if one individual falls apart, then they're pretty much lost in the noise, right? Next slide, please. And so another sort of attribute that's evolved over time is that as we gather a larger and larger product portfolio, some of which we built natively, some of which we acquired, it all comes onto this platform that we built, right? It all gets integrated into this platform that we built. So it all becomes part of a platform. It all gets the same compliance, it gets the same scalability, it gets the same availability, it gets all the same sort of isms and attributes that the sort of what we call the CIP platform, the continuous intelligence platform, has internally. And I'll let Manny add a little bit of color here to the slide.
Yeah, so since we're here talking about Splunk, the way that Splunk actually takes it, they take a more of a modular approach to the functionality, and they actually have multiple clouds. So there's around 5 different clouds for observability. and security, and there's no integration or between the actual clouds itself. For example, Splunk Observability Cloud, it doesn't have the Splunk platform that's included in it. The Splunk platform is the core, the analytics piece for it. They're completely separate products, requires purchasing 2 different products to get one thing actually done. So this results in a complex buying cycle with multiple offerings, lots of licensing that are actually different across each product line, and there's lots of overlap as well. So we've seen a lot of our customers actually start off with the observability use case, actually easily switch over to security use cases. It doesn't require a lot of heavy lifting. It's basically, there's nothing to download, there's nothing to provision. It's just a licensing and entitlement change, and you're up and running with our security workload. So it makes a big difference when the platform is unified versus being siloed.
Cool. Thanks, Manny. I actually have a question for Stefan. Stefan, so when you hit upon something very key here. So what I've seen some approaches, including Splunk, saying, hey, I have a manual knob. You got to set the dial to either ingest or search. But I think the key point that you highlighted there is that just doesn't work in a real world, in a modern workload. Let's say there is Valentine's Day coming up, right? So meaning if there's a peak in traffic, there's no way you can predict, know how to set the dial, and then you'll have a performance degradation either on the ingest side or on the search side. In other words, affecting the customer experience. I think that's your key point there.
Right. And, you know, with sort of these types of monolithic architecture approaches, like auto scaling is kind of an impossibility because of how the storage is laid out.
Right.
So it's easy to scale out. Usually you can add more machines to a Splunk installation, but taking them away is extremely difficult and not something you do, you know, all day, every day as your load ebbs and flows. And just because we're talking about this, I saw one question on the Q&A here where someone asks, you know, can you elaborate on a few more advantages of being cloud native other than scale? They're a small company that does not see a lot of spikes. And I would say, you know, there's a lot less toil in a SaaS solution. You know, you never have to worry about upgrading anything at Sumo Logic. That's done for you. It's dialed in for you. And it's just kind of worry-free. You don't have to worry yourself about availability because we do. We actually do a measurably good job at it. We have a you know, a big process behind lifesite and availability and SLOs that's really working. So there's a lot of advantages of, you know, a SaaS way of consuming this kind of a product that go beyond the scalability of it. That is just like, especially if you're a small shop, you don't want to dedicate people to running a server and running Splunk and upgrading it and, you know, debugging performance issues with it and all that stuff. We all do that for you, right? And you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, or create double file tickets to get it upgraded or installed.
Yeah.
Cool, fantastic. Thanks, Stefan and Manny. Why don't we segue to the next section? I know, Akash, your professional services and customer success team at Sumo Logic, you have successfully migrated or replaced many legacy solutions at enterprises of all types. How about you share some of the nuggets and what you have for our customers today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Girish. So first, let me start off with saying that the majority of our customer base that we migrated to Sumo has coincidentally been previous Splunk customers. So the professional services team comes with a lot of experience when it comes to migrating off Splunk. And let's review what the typical approach looks like. How do we approach these Splunk migrations? What are our best practices and the steps we follow? Firstly, we stay away from calling it a migration. We prefer to call it, let's modernize and evolve, right? Migration is basically you're taking your problems from one platform to another. And that is something we strictly want to avoid. What we want you to do is, let's leverage what you have in Splunk that is valuable to you. And let's bring it to Sumo and let's modernize and evolve within the Sumo platform, right? Four of the key phases, and this is not technical, this is more around the process. reimagine your security platform. You're moving to a modern SaaS solution. What in your eyes does a modern security platform look like? Plan that out and have that vision. And once you're done with that, evaluate your current stack in Splunk. What does your current Splunk deployment look like? What were your pain points? What do you want to improve on? And what is the value that you want to bring in Sumo? And then combine point 1 and 2, you're modernizing and evolving overall in Sumo, right? The third step is approach with a method. The professional services team has certain steps we follow for any migration, and it doesn't matter what the use case is, the process remains the same. And we strongly encourage customers to follow that approach so that we're seeing success at the end of the day. And lastly, leverage best-in-class support. Without praising the services team too much, we're a team of talented folks, and it's a talented team that's going to, at the end of the day, provide the value that you need.
Perfect. Hey, Akash, before we move to the next slide, I know in the first one you said reimagine your security platform, and the same construct or the methodology applies to observability or ITOps solutions from Splunk, right?
Yes, absolutely. So it doesn't matter what the use case is. Could be a DevOps use case, could be security, could be tracing metrics, or could be just general log analytics, right? It's about envisioning how you want your new platform to look like.
Perfect.
Right. So let's dig deeper into reimagining within Sumo Logic. Firstly, assess your status quo. What does the current state in Splunk look like, right? Be prepared to evolve in Sumo. Not everything is going to be mapping 1:1 with Splunk, right? These are two different platforms with a lot of similarities, but they're different platforms. So evolution in Sumo would be adopting some of our best practices, some of our approaches, some of our recommendations, which we can work with your team in tandem to bring value, right? And the next step is take the next step and let's modernize. Let's get into it. Classifying your data and leveraging data tiers in Sumo Logic is a really important phase, because there are tons of technologies out there, right? Some of these are really high volume, but they're costing a lot in your existing solution to store the data, to ingest the data. And at the end of the day, you're not doing much with the data. That is where data tiers in Sumo Logic come into play. We allow you to prioritize your data. And then depending on your use case and priority, you can place that data in different tiers within Sumo Logic. And that in turn helps you save cost in Sumo. Yeah. The next phase is something I emphasize on a lot on every migration call. Revisit your content in Splunk and clean it up, right? When we go through this phase, on an average, we've seen a 20 to 60% reduction in the amount of content that the customer wants to bring into Sumo. There's a lot of stale content sitting out there. This is your chance to revisit your content and clean it up, right? It's going to help you reduce the migration timeline, reduce the number of resources you need, cost of the migration. So the cleanup is a really, really important phase in my opinion. And lastly, rinse but do not repeat, right? You're moving to a new solution. You're rinsing your problems from your existing solutions, but you're not repeating them. Now, our approach has generally been three steps, right? We focus on enablement. The goal of the PS team's engagement is not only to migrate you to Sumo, but also to enable your team so that in the future, when the PS team walks out, your team is fully enabled to use Sumo on their own, right? If they need to modify some content, build something new, bring in new logs or some new use cases. We want them to be self-enabled and be able to do this on their own. Now, of course, if you need support from Sumo Logic, the customer success team or the support team, that support is always available to you, but enablement is our goal, right? And it's as important as migrating you successfully. Adopting Sumo Logic best practices. This goes with be ready to evolve, right? We have certain best practices that we call the Sumo way. The Splunk way is different from the Sumo way. And we encourage customers to adopt Sumo Logic best practices so that you get value at the end of the day. And again, I'm going to emphasize on prioritize and clean up. This is a really important phase to get a fresh start and evolve in Sumo. Next slide, please, Girish.
Yeah, will do. So one thing I wanted to share with our attendees today is we also offer free training and certification, unlike Splunk. So if someone wants to get started with Sumo Logic, you don't have to wait to be a customer yet. We encourage every month. Our training team runs free training and certifications across our portfolio. That's security, observability. Feel free to take advantage of that.
And I think that probably answers one of the Q&A questions here, where someone asks about, we're worried about learning a new tool. How hard is it to learn, and what resources are available to our users to ensure they're successful? Right. And it starts, before you even commit or buy Sumo Logic, you have a lot of resources available.
Right. Thanks, Stefan. And I also want to add to that, we offer this training and certification at the local geo time zones. That's Americas friendly, EMEA friendly, and APAC friendly time zones as well. Just visit to sumologic.com and you can, it's a self-serve training concept we have. It's open to everyone, irrespective of who we are using today. Back to you, Akash.
Thank you. So this slide says it all. We're in it with our customers and we're here to help. You're working with the best-in-class support from the services team, the customer success team, our partners. We're here to help our customers, and we take success seriously. Now let's review what a high-level process would look like, right? Right above is the Sumo team, right below is the Sumo team, and right above is the first phase of any migration is the discovery and design process, right? Let's evaluate your current stack. Let's scope out what are the data sources that need to be cut over to Sumo. What is the content that needs to be migrated? And we work with you to get this done, right? Once we get through the design and discovery, we move into the prioritization phase. This is where you will clean up your content. You will be working with maybe 10 different teams. You will have to reach out to them and see what's actually being used and what's still. So we will provide some Splunk queries that you can run to get these metrics about usage for each of the dashboards or searches or correlation rules. But at the end of the day, it's your decision to conclude what's useful and what's not. Once we get through that phase, we begin the data collection phase. In some cases, it's a simple cutover from Splunk to Sumo. Let's say you're sending logs over syslog, you're just cutting it over to a new host where Sumo is receiving it. In some cases, as I was mentioning before, adopt Sumo Logic best practices. There might be certain data sources which are easier to collect in Sumo. So you might want to change the ingest mechanism and use the native approach that Sumo Logic recommends. Once we get through collection, then we get into the content development or the build phase. This is where we do the heavy lifting. We build out the content. And as we start building out the content, we start passing it over to your team for you to validate and sign off on each of the dashboards or alerts or whatever we are migrating, right? And at the end of the day, success is a joint effort. And as a part of success, we also have enablement sessions and training sessions for our migrations. And enablement is something we follow throughout the 5 phases, but the training at the end is something that is tailored to your use case. How are you using Sumo? The PS consultant working on this engagement will be the one delivering the training. So this is a private training. And we strongly encourage all the end users to join the trainings, right? There's no limit on the number of end users.
Hey, Akash, I have a question for you. So I know you represent, when you said Sumo Logic, you are using a broader sense from a context of it would be remiss on our part if we don't include our partners here, obviously, right? So because you and your team are actively engaged with their partners, can you give some color on how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you an example of a large health insurance company that we recently migrated from Splunk. We had a partner involved. What we actually did is we tag teamed with the partner where they took 60% of the content and we migrated the remaining 20. We migrated 20% and the customer volunteered to migrate 20% just so that their team can get more hands-on and enabled. And in other cases also, we worked in tandem with our partners. There are large migrations. There was a recent migration, which was 400 dashboards within 8 weeks. That's a tight timeline for 400 dashboards. That's where we had 6 people from the Sumo PS team, along with four members from our partner team who tag team and got this done on time. So it's an approach we followed in the past. In some cases, we've had partners take the entire migration. In some cases, we tag team with them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I think the key point, folks, here is that we have a very active partner ecosystem that help us and will help you be successful. And we have several hundred of them, and many of them are actively involved in this program as well. Reach out to us at partners@sumologic.com. Back to you, Akash. Next slide, is it?
Yes, please. Thank you. So that was a high-level phase. Now let's look at what it actually looks like, right? We have the kickoffs where we will have introductions. Let's kickstart the project. We jump into the design and discovery. As we don't want to waste time at any phase, so as we are in the design and discovery phase, we will also start the technical onboarding phase. Now, as we start getting some data in, we will jump right into the content development. And the content validation pretty much runs in parallel with the content development phase, right? And the content validation is something that is led by your team. And there might be feedback or changes that might be required. So it comes back to us, goes back into the content development phase, make the changes and send it back to the next phase. And towards the end of the engagement, we have the enablement phase where we provide the trainings, documentation, anything that might help your team. Some of our customers prefer to move the enablement phase to the start of the engagement, just so that their team knows what we're doing, right? So that's an option, we leave it up to you. Now, in terms of timelines, we've had migrations run from anywhere between 4 weeks to 4 months. It really depends on the size of the engagement, how engaged your team is with us, right? There might be hurdles we run into, like the network team's not available and we're not able to get these logs, right? So maybe sometimes we're stuck over there for 1 month, but a smooth migration, a large migration, we've wrapped it up in 8 weeks. So migrations are something we're absolutely flexible on as long as we have the engagement from your team.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, particularly when you're migrating, let's say, one of the top retailers or a Fortune 100 company, whether you're a retailer or financial services, the rigor and the compliance mandates that you have to go through, and really, it's fast, but at the same time, you have a very structured and methodical approach that helps enterprises of all size and shape to migrate.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, actually, during the discovery and design phase, the obstacles we've experienced in the past, we bring it up during the design and discovery, just to give the customer a heads up that, hey, these might be the problems you might run into. Let's tackle it beforehand and let us know if you anticipate any delays. We can modify the timeline or the project plan accordingly.
Right. Yeah, I actually had a customer speak with me at AWS re:Invent. They had an 8-month migration plan. They finished their migration in less than 5 months. So it is fascinating. Anyway, thanks, Akash and team. Anything else before we move on to the next?
That's it on my end.
Okay, perfect. So folks, so you've heard from Stefan on the technology differentiators, why architecture makes a difference in the modern SaaS or cloud-centric world today. And Akash walked us through a few examples of how he and his team have migrated customers and the process they have in place. As you see, it's a very sophisticated process that can scale up depending on the need of the org, or it can be done in a matter of weeks as well. So why don't we switch gears and actually have Manny walk us through Manny, if you can walk us through some real customer examples of customers who moved to Sumo and have decided Sumo over Splunk.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah. Next slide, let's talk about. All right, so first up is North American Bank Company, or NAB. They're a leading payment technology provider for credit card processing, e-commerce, mobile payments, and the back-end business solutions for some of like the biggest global brands like Starbucks, Honda, British Petroleum. The company employs 1,300 employees and processes over 45 billion in transactions annually. It's a tech company in the financial space, so obviously they deal with massive amounts of sensitive data, and they are a target for cybersecurity attacks often. So they were an existing Splunk security customer, but Splunk just proved too unwieldy to manage and maintain for their small SOC team. They had to do a lot of manual work on their end, like update the ingesters on the Splunk backend, and these are issues they didn't expect from a cloud solution. Additionally, the Splunk pricing model, which is flat pricing model that they had, it was not compatible with their long-term data ingestion requirements. So the NAB team evaluated and decided to move to Sumo Logic's Cloud SIEM after a successful POC. And this was driven by the wonderful partners at CBI Security. So we do deal with a lot of security partners. So after struggling with data collection for so long with their existing solution, their experience with Sumo just finally allowed them to focus on what really mattered, and that was the triaging of alerts and addressing the threats. And lastly, the Cloud Flex pricing model that we had allowed them to stay within budget with multiple subsidiaries and sister entities that NAB ingest a massive amounts of data. With their previous SIEM, Splunk Security, they had a flat charging model. So they often they had to make the decision to exclude data that could be valuable in detection later down the line, just in order to save cost. So that was one of the big examples we have here. That was a security use case with North American Bank Company.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more to that, it was a 2-person SOC team. When we say small SOC team, fascinating example. Thanks, Manny. Should we move to the next one?
Yeah, of course. So this one is an anonymized customer, but they are a digital experience company. They came to us after the new engineering leadership was looking to get a better handle on their overall cost, as well as the tool consolidations where possible. They were using multiple products, one of them being Splunk. They were using multiple products for logs, for metrics, and they also needed better visibility for their growing container-based hosting initiative that was running on EKS. But before they decided on Sumo, they needed to have Sumo design a proper approach to the POV that could establish immediate value over their existing Splunk deployment. So on this particular case study, I'm going to have Akash actually give some insights here, because he was deeply involved in this migration.
Thanks, Manny. Yeah, so I've been involved in this engagement. It also happens to be the largest migration in the history of Sumo. And we were looking at close to 400 dashboards migrating from SignalFX. And with the clean and prioritized approach, we were able to bring a 20% reduction in that number, bring it down to 320 dashboards within a 90-day timeline. This customer is monitoring the Super Bowl and the Olympics. So the Feb timeline was absolutely necessary to meet. But it was, the main use case here was reducing cost and consolidating their platforms into one, right? And they've seen success over the last 3 months that we've migrated them.
So nice. So the summary there is, it's a tool consolidation, moving away from kind of observability platform to Sumo Logic. And I think the flexibility of our credits-based licensing model came in quite handy here.
Yeah.
Cool. Manny, next one, is it?
Yeah, next slide. This is kind of a fun one. This is CVS Interactive. So they needed a way to ingest their CDN logs from their streaming infrastructure when they were streaming the Super Bowl. So while they knew that it was going to be a massive amount of data actually coming in, they weren't really sure on the amount of people that would be streaming the game live. But what they did know is that their existing non-cloud native Splunk solution wouldn't be able to handle this scale. So that's when they reached out to Sumo Logic. So not only did Sumo help CBS Interactive ingest a massive amount of data, it was 1.2 million the EPS and around 75 terabytes of log data. And that's in a span of 3 hours. They did it with lots of headroom. So I'm going to ask Stefan to actually just add a little bit more color on this one because he was actually one of the leads here.
Yeah, so this was kind of an interesting exercise because unlike in some other cases here, we clearly knew when there would be a big ingestion spike happening from this customer, and we understood kind of what use cases they had. But what we didn't know, and they didn't know, because you may or may not know this, but the TV networks in the United States take turns hosting the Super Bowl. So it had been several years since CBS Interactive had hosted this, and they simply did not know how many people would actually be streaming the game. We had a few games leading up to this, football games that, are sort of the precursors to the Super Bowl, where we were able to observe what the traffic did during the game. But in no way did that inform how much bigger the Super Bowl would be. So we did some load testing ahead of time to make sure the system, truly could absorb that big of a spike in that short of a time. And we had plenty of headroom. So just for data point's sake, we tested up to a rate of ingestion of about 1.2 petabytes a day. And they peaked out during this Super Bowl at 75 terabytes a day of a rate. So it was a fraction, and the actual event was pretty uneventful, so to speak, from our perspective. We were obviously monitoring this closely on our end, but like absolutely nothing interesting happened. And to make matters worse, the actual football game was a snooze also. So we had the game up obviously in the war room, and it was the most boring football game known to mankind. We subsequently helped another TV network in one of the following years with the same, problem set. And for that game, it was actually triple the load from the CBS Interactive case, and it was not a problem. What's remarkable is that we were able to basically spin up a large pool of machines ahead of time, 2 hours before the game, basically, and then 2 hours after the game, shut it all back down, and sort of our AWS spend and subsequently the customer's cost was actually pretty moderate. And the other thing worth mentioning is that, this is a relatively, predictable large-scale event, but we've had our fair share of unpredictable ones also, and the system generally handles those with little fanfare. Like we had a video doorbell company that one day saw like a very big ingestion spike and data spike, and they were surprised by this. And it turned out it was Halloween, and people were going around ringing lots of doorbells. And there we didn't have any warning, or no one had warning, basically, but the system handled it no problem anyway. All right, next slide. I think we have a few more minutes for the presentation and then Q&A.
Okay, so fascinating, Stefan, Manny. So a couple of key takeaways, folks. So what you've heard from our team is cloud is not a foreign language for us. I won't use the terms like we were born in the cloud and others. We actually, from day one, everything was fundamentally architected for cloud then, and we continue to optimize and tweak it for multi-cloud and others where we are today. And unlike Splunk, no long-term fees for short-term peaks. That's like Stefan calls it, that's so 2005 thinking. And the Super Bowl example was a case in point here. And whether your use case requires exabytes or it's petabytes or gigabytes, we have a very optimized way of making your business work so that you don't have to borrow more money to spend on the searching and solving your use cases. It's natively we do that. A little bit more. So for folks, to make it easy, the Sumo team and in partnership with many of our services partners, we are offering, there is a promotion that we have underway. That is, if you reach out to us, I won't spend much time on this specifics, but the key point is we are offering up to 1 million free credits. That's the licensing unit in the Sumo language. So if customers or prospects who are interested in that, reach out to us through your existing partner or email us at partners@sumologic.com. Before we get to Q&A quickly, so we are in this together, folks. So as you heard from our Stefan, Akash, and Manny, Sumo Logic and partners, we jointly address your security and observability challenges, whether it is pure cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, on-prem cloud combination. We solve all kinds of use cases there. Our professional services team is offering a free migration assessment. Do reach out to us. That is, if you think you have you want to migrate from Splunk, we encourage you to migrate. Do reach out to us. We have a free workshop on that. Engage us if you're reach out to us through our partners at sumologic.com. We have many partners. We can't name all our partners who are actively engaged in this program. And we have lots of information on our website and more to come in the upcoming days and weeks. So that's a quick snapshot regarding our main topic today, that is, don't let legacy Splunk derail your app and security modernization. So at this point in time, we'll take some Q&A. Manny, what questions do we have lined up?
We've got a number of questions. Let's see. The first one on the top of the list that we haven't answered already is, can you comment on Splunk's new workload-based pricing and how it compares to Sumo Logic?
Manny, do you want to, why don't I take the Q&A? Why don't you answer that question?
Since some of these will be coming to me. Yeah, so the first one, Splunk's new workload-based pricing. So with the workload-based pricing model, you determine the amount of CPUs and the amount of resources that you allocate. That's dependent on your workload that you have. So it's up to you to determine what your correct workload is. So you could be, is it premium monitoring? Is it continuous monitoring? Is it ad hoc investigation? Is it basic reporting? Those are the different kind of workloads that they have available. But what happens if you pick the wrong type of workload? That means that you're either overpaying for the resources that you're purchasing, or you could run into some slow performance of your overall deployment. So those are kind of the big drawbacks with that workload-based pricing. You need to determine the amount of CPUs, the amount of cores that you allocate to your instance. And also, it's good to know that in the documentation that Splunk has, it says that for best performance, you should only utilize 60 to 70% of your license limit. So obviously that means you need to over provision for those peaks that you may not be aware of.
Yeah, so that's a valid point. In other words, I think, Manny, what you're saying is not only do you have to keep looking at how you need to have manual knobs and hoping that it works, right?
Yep, correct.
There's one question which I'll take. The question is, which partners are ready to transact regarding Splunk to Sumo migration? Actually, we have a long list of partners on this. Please reach out to us at partners@sumologic.com. We'll get back to you on the specifics on that. This looks like a question, great question for Akash. What does the migration process look like in real life? And will you be able to replicate 100% of what Splunk is doing for us? I think you answered what does the migration process look like? Maybe the second part of this is, will you be able to replicate 100% of what Splunk is doing for us? Akash?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually a good question. Let me summarize the process quickly. We break it down into phases. The first phase is the design and discovery. We jump into the technical onboarding phase. Then we jump to the content development phase, where we actually migrate your content. And then we have the enablement phase. Now, to answer your second question, if we can do it 1:1, it really depends. Your use case is met in Sumo, but is it going to be using the exact same operators to achieve the end result? Maybe not, right? But your output is going to be the same.
Thanks, Akash. Stefan, I have a few questions for you, sir. So the first question is, how does SIEM security monitoring and compliance integrate with Sumo's observability platform?
Yeah, so on an architectural level, they all run as part of the platform. They're microservices in some cases that we sort of gained through acquisition. We acquired a company called JAS. We acquired a company called Factor Chain and others, DF Labs, and over time, all of those pieces are becoming part of the platform, and they're integrated into the platform pretty seamlessly, right? Yeah. So it's the design is that it's a single platform, and you just spend credits on sort of the product pieces that are of interest to you and that you have a need for at any given time. Okay,
this is a geek out question for you, Stefan. I'll ask this anyway. I would love to see how you address this. The question is, I would love to see a flow chart of how data is taken from the client to Sumo Logic servers. More about collectors and agents. I know you're grinning.
Yeah, I don't have my iPad. Otherwise, I would scribble a flow chart on the screen right now. It's pretty straightforward though. So there's three fundamental modes by which we get data into Sumo Logic. One uses an agent called the collector. And so you install that agent somewhere, and there's multiple sort of deployment architectures, one per machine, a central one that we can walk you through. And that talks over the internet to what we call receiver to get the data in. Another alternative is that you can send us HTTP requests with the data, and there's a variety of clients we provide you with. It's a pretty straightforward protocol. We have things like log4j appenders, et cetera, to get the data in. And then the third mode is pretty differentiated for us, which is what we call cloud-to-cloud collection. So where your data is already somewhere in the cloud, be it an S3 bucket or Office 365, or any number of sources that we can reach over the network, we can get the data and collect it from there without you having to install anything, right? So those are the three sort of fundamental methods of getting data into Sumo Logic. It bears mentioning that we are participating in an open telemetry group to develop a fully open source collection agent for logs, along with some of the other vendors in the space. And so in the coming years, that'll be a replacement for our own proprietary collector that is kind of open source. And yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Stefan. Thank you, Stefan, Akash, and Manny. I know we are almost like a few seconds away from the end of the session. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. And so for next steps, please reach out to reach out to us or to our partners through any of these links that you've shared. Again, on behalf of Sumo Logic and partners, thank you so much for attending session, and each of you will get a link to today's recording. Thank you.
Everyone.